Welcome back, everybody. Hope you've been well. Question of the week is, what is the Jobs Act? Or, why is the Jobs Act so important? Basically, the Jobs Act, the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, was a law that was passed by Congress in 2012, signed into law in 2013, I believe. And if you remember what was going on at that time, it was not right after, but after the financial collapse of 2008. That was probably the lowest point in our economy. After that point, right, 2012 was probably the worst time in the United States as far as jobs and the economy. So Congress passed the Jobs Act, obviously, to create new jobs to help stimulate the economy. How did it do that? Well, if you want to find out, keep watching. Stay tuned. I'm going to go over the Jobs Act. First, again, for anyone new to the channel, if you don't know me, my name is John Ye. I am one of the partners here at Trowbridge Law Group. And although I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer. So none of this is legal advice. None of the videos on our channel should be construed as legal advice. If you want legal advice, guess what? We're a law firm. You can hire us. Give us a call. Hire us as your attorneys, and I will give you as much legal advice as you want. If you want to, you can reach out to us at our website, trowbridgelawgroup.com. We give free 30-minute consultation. There's a little red button at the top of our homepage. Click that, schedule a free 30-minute consultation with either myself or my partner, Gene. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Helps with the YouTube algorithm, apparently, so, help us out. Leave us a comment. Ask me a question. I'm happy to answer your questions down below, or, if it's a good question, maybe I'll make a video about it. So, leave us a comment down below. Back to the regularly scheduled programming. What is the Jobs Act? What did the Jobs Act do? Why is it so important? Again, just to reiterate, it is the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, designed to promote job formation, to promote capital formation for smaller businesses, business startups, right, to help stimulate the economy in 2012, 2013. And the main way that the Jobs Act did that, well, actually three main ways the Jobs Act was designed to help smaller companies to make it easier for them to raise money. Capital formation for small businesses is basically what the Jobs Act did, right? So the three ways that the Jobs Act helped make it easier for small businesses to raise money were, first, it allowed people raising money under Regulation D an avenue to generally solicit investors. So previously under Regulation D, by the way, was passed in 1981. So from 1981 all the way to 2013, when the Jobs Act was passed, Regulation D basically did not permit solicitation to investors at all. You could not advertise your offering if you were doing a Regulation D offering. That's why it's known as private placement offering under Regulation D. And that's why historically syndications, real estate syndications, were done under Regulation D and were done privately, right? You could only raise money from people that you had a pre-existing relationship with. Well, around this time, in 2012, not only was the intent of the law to kind of stimulate the economy because of what happened with the financial crisis in 2008, a lot of crowdfunding stuff was going on at the time, right? Like, so Kickstarter, Indiegogo, those companies were really starting to pick up, and there was a lot of talk as far as making it easier for companies to crowdfund. Companies wanted to kind of ride this wave of crowdfunding and raise money online, but not just do a Kickstarter campaign and sell their product, or do an Indiegogo or GoFundMe campaign and look for donations. Companies wanted to crowdfund and actually raise money and sell equity in their company. And if you're doing that and you want to do it online and advertise, basically the only way you could do that is if you were already a public company, if you're a registered public company, if your securities were registered with the SEC. That's the only time you could advertise your securities. Well, a lot of people in Congress wanted to, make it easier for these small businesses, the small companies, to raise money through advertising their offerings online. And one of the ways they did that was by amending Regulation D to allow for advertisements under certain Regulation D offerings. So, most people in this space know now we have Rule 506C offerings. So before, there was no 506B and 506C. There was just 506, which was the traditional syndication, can't advertise, raising money from people you already know. Well, part of the Jobs Act, one of the provisions of the Jobs Act was the creation of 506C, where companies can advertise under Regulation D. But, obviously because you're advertising now, or the SEC wants to make sure that the people investing in these types of offerings are protected, right? So because you could advertise, it's a little bit riskier, so they wanted to make sure that these riskier investments are only available to certain types of investors, which are accredited investors. So people that have a high net worth or net worth over $1 million and or high income, so people with an income over $200,000 a year. So if you're an accredited investor, you can invest in 506C offerings. Right? 506C offerings are only available to accredited investors. And on top of that, issuers or companies that are using 506C have to take steps to actually verify that investors are accredited, versus the old rule, 506B, where you could take accredited investors and up to 35 non-accredited but otherwise sophisticated investors, and you didn't have to verify them under 506B. You just establish that substantive and pre-existing relationship, and then when the investor invests, all they have to do is check the box under 506B. Versus the new 506C rule that came out with the Jobs Act, you have to take this process of verifying all of your investors. So it's an extra step to make sure that everyone investing in the 506C offering, because it's riskier, you have to make sure that everyone investing in the offering is suitable to handle those risks. So that's the first thing that the Jobs Act did, or the first way that it made it easier for companies, small companies, to raise money. Creation of Rule 506C, which allowed general solicitation for the first time under Regulation D. The second thing that the Jobs Act did to make it easier for companies to raise money was amending Regulation A. So before the Jobs Act, Regulation A was almost never used. As far as I could tell, I don't, from the research I've done, almost nobody used Regulation A. And it's actually, Regulation A has been around for a really, really long time. The way the SEC names their regulation is alphabetically. So Regulation A is actually the oldest regulation. And it's never really been used because the cap back then, previously to the Jobs Act, was $5 million. You could only raise up to $5 million under Regulation A. And the biggest issue with Regulation A was that it did not preempt state law. So if you were to do a Regulation A offering, you had to do all your blue sky filings, which is, make sure that every state that you're raising money from, you find some state law that allows you to sell securities in their state and basically apply to raise money in their state. So if you're doing a Regulation A offering back then, you're raising less than $1 million, and you have to navigate all these state laws, which made it a giant headache, right? Especially when you have Reg D available since 1981, where you don't have to worry about state law, generally speaking. It's much easier to do that, and there's no cap under Regulation D. You could raise hundreds of millions of however much you want, billions of dollars under Regulation D. So Reg A previously had a cap of $5 million and did not preempt state law. Well, Congress decided to amend that under the Jobs Act to make it easier, to make it more attractive for small businesses to use. And they wanted to make Reg A kind of like a in between a Reg D offering and a full-blown public offering, right? They understand that the way that companies kind of develop as far as like corporations, right? You start off as a private company, you sell securities and raise money from a small group of investors privately, and then you grow, and you have to raise more and more capital until you get to the point where you have to do a full public offering and offer your securities to the public. They wanted to create like a stepping stone for businesses, right? So Reg D, small businesses, as you grow, you need some sort of exemption, some sort of regulation to allow like a bigger company. They're bigger, they're too big to do a Reg D, but they're not big enough to do a full public offering, and that's where the new Reg A comes in, right? So they amended Reg A to kind of fill that space, and they called it Reg A plus. Well, really, it's Reg A and Reg A plus. So there's two tiers. They created two tiers within Reg A, right? So tier 1 was the, believe was capped at $25 million. So if you raise up to $25 million, you're in tier 1. And then tier 2 was $50 million. But the difference between the tiers, or the main difference that's important to note, is state preemption. So they fixed that kind of, for tier 2, right? So if you did a tier 1 offering up to $25 million, you still did not preempt state law. You still have to worry about blue sky filings. But if you do a tier 2 offering and raise up to $50 million, you now preempt state law. You don't have to worry about blue sky state filings. So it made it a lot easier to do a Reg A offering. It made it a lot more attractive because the cap was a lot higher, and you didn't have to worry about state law depending on if you follow the other rules under tier 2. So that's one part of the Jobs Act did, that was amending Regulation A. Today, actually, they changed it again. So Reg A now, if you're doing a tier 2 offering, you can raise up to $75 million, actually. So trying to make it even more attractive. Hopefully more and more companies, as far as the SEC is concerned, use Reg A Plus to kind of, as like a stepping stone to doing a full public offering. So that's the second thing that the Jobs Act did. The third way that the Jobs Act made it easier for small companies to raise money was through creation of equity crowdfunding. So, again, this whole period of time was crowdfunding. Crowdfunding was like the hot word. Everyone wants to do crowdfunding, to use that buzz term and say, hey, I'm crowdfunding my company. Come invest in my company because I'm crowdfunding. But they wanted to create a real, true equity crowdfunding, right? So Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, they're crowdfunding, but investors don't actually get equity in the company. They wanted to create a way, an avenue for companies to crowdfund online through portals and sell equity in their company. So they created an entire new exemption, entire new regulation called Regulation Crowdfunding, or Regulation CF, as a lot of people call it. There are a lot of different rules and provisions that you have to follow if you're doing a Regulation CF offering, but the most important ones are, number one, you have to use a registered crowdfunding portal, and these portals are registered with FINRA, with the SEC. They're basically a broker-dealer. Because they're a broker-dealer, they charge a fee. Number one, you're required to use them. The form that you file with the SEC is called the Form C, versus the Form D with Reg D, and then the Form 1A with Reg A. So with Reg CF, there's the Form C. But there's also a cap on how much you can raise under Reg CF. So when it first came into law, it was $1 million. Right? So a company can only raise up to $1 million under Reg CF. And you can kind of see where the SEC kind of imagined Regulation CF to occupy, what space that was intended for. And it was smaller companies, very, very small companies, startup companies, essentially, because you can only raise $1 million. So it's supposed to be more of an alternative to angel investors, to VC, companies just getting started out, to look for their initial startup capital to get the ball rolling. Right, you do a Reg CF offering, and then maybe do a Reg D offering, and then you grow and grow and grow, do Reg A offering, and then you grow and grow and grow and do an IPO. Right? So Reg CF is kind of supposed to be, that first stage. The types of companies that use Reg CF tend to be smaller, right, because of that. So you go look at the portals today, and you can see the types of companies that are raising money on these portals. They tend to be, small, family-run businesses, right? So distilleries, breweries, tech startups, things of that nature. That was one of the criticisms, though, of Reg CF, was the cap was only $1 million. Not that many people could utilize that. So they made some changes recently, and now it's $5 million. You could raise up to $5 million in a Reg CF offering. Still some challenges for companies out there, especially if you're doing a real estate syndication. Timing is always an issue as far as a real estate offering, because you have the deadline with closing. Reg CF tends to take a little bit longer because you're working with the portal, and they have to do their due diligence as far as analyzing your company and making sure that you're right for their portal. So there's a timing issue. So Reg CF hasn't really been utilized much by real estate syndicators. The $1 million cap was a big hurdle as well. So now that it's $5 million, maybe more companies, real estate syndicators, are considering doing a Reg C offering. But I think the biggest hurdle with Reg CF, is the portals themselves, right? You have to get listed on the portal. So number one problem with that is getting listed, right? So talk to the portals if you're interested in that, if that's something you're thinking about. But anyways, that's the three ways that the Jobs Act made it easier for companies to raise money. Basically set the stage for what we have now as far as private offerings, as far as the regulatory framework for exemptions. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please again hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We put out weekly videos, and it would really help us out if you liked and subscribed. Leave a comment too. Happy to interact with you guys down in the comments, answer whatever questions you might have. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you guys next week.